Well, it's time to kick this thing into gear and start our Talking Head series. We may as well get this shit rolling, Sean. Welcome, everyone. This is the first of this new series, and today we have the keeper of the sheep, defender of the Southern Hemisphere, protector of the last hot cup of tea, Sean Moffatt, all the way from the Falkland Islands. How goes it, Sean?
Hi, Justin. Love the introduction. Thanks for that. I'll put that on my resume. And yeah, it's good to be talking to you and look forward to talking about Falklands and racing in the islands.
Yeah, and like we introduced this series, and we had a bit of brief discussion already. This series is all about you guys and all about the different islands all over the planet. So we decided the Falkland Islands has been, quite honestly, you guys have interacted with us more than pretty much every other club or island that we deal with. So we said, well, let's do it with the Falklands first. So why don't you tell us a little bit about first yourself, what your daily life is like in the Falklands, and then we'll roll into information about the club.
Okay, so yeah, I'm 38 years old. Been racing bikes all my life. Typical story. And my family's kind of been involved heavily in motocross in the Falkland Islands since the first event, really. And I'm proud to have competed both locally, have a few championships under my belt, and also represent the Falklands internationally, which was pretty special. Day-to-day life, I work in a family business, which is a bit of like a DIY home improvement store. And then weekends try to get out as much as possible, but got a little baby girl who's just over a year old, so that's pretty exciting. Looking forward to getting her on a bike of some sort, and hopefully step back into racing at a later date once I've got a bit more time on my hands.
Perfect. So we'll talk about the availability of bikes on the island shortly, but I know you guys have got an interesting story down there. So tell us a little bit about the Falkland Islands. Is it the Motocross Association or Motorcycle Association?
Yeah, we called it a motorcycle association, Falklands Motorcycle Association, just because at the time we weren't sure if we'd be running, enduro trials, all sorts of things. So it just all fell under that one umbrella, that one committee. Predominantly it's motocross, but we have had all sorts of events in the past. It goes back to 1977 with our first event. Now, back then, this is like pre-conflict. So in 1982, Argentina invaded the Falkland Islands. The British came and liberated us, and we're forever grateful for that. And a lot changed after that. The
Just
country
on
really
that,
did
Sean.
change.
Just on that, Sean. So Shakai is telling me that shit tracking came from the British soldiers coming over there and riding their bullshit bikes around the island. Is that true or not? Is he making that bullshit up?
Honestly, I don't know where he got that from. Like, yes, shit tracking's a term that's used, but I've never heard of it coming from the military. Ironically, though, my dad was in the military in 1977. He was based down here, so this is pre-war. Things were a little bit different back then, and there was just a very small garrison, which was just outside the capital. And my dad was actually what's known as Royal Marines, and he was part of the motorcycle display team, or White Helmet. So at the time, he had been going around the UK like doing shows, and they're the sort of guys that are like jumping through fire and creating pyramids on bikes and riding a motorbike from the top of a ladder. So he was pretty handy, and when he was down here, I think he'd got a few BSAs going. There were people on bikes, lots of old British bikes, BSAs, Nortons, Triumphs, all sorts of old bikes like that. And he actually got approached by the chief of police at the time, Terry Peck, and Terry was kind of pulling his hair out. Everyone's turning around on the roads, and he said to my dad, like, could you organise something? Could you put an event on? So he said, yeah. So my dad had, some experience in, entering trials events and things like that. So that was the very beginning. I think it was December 1977 at Felton Stream, and he organised an observed trial, and then they sort of had a bit of a motocross in the afternoon where they opened up all the gates. And it was, it was a success, but that was, there was a big gap after that until they really started racing again in 1992.
Oh, wow. So you didn't get back racing until 92. Is that from the war? So you had the war obviously down there, and the conflict, or whatever everyone wants to nicely call it, and then didn't get back to racing until 92.
Yeah, that's right. So 82 was a conflict, and the garrison that was based at Moody Brook, which was known as a Navy party, Naval Party 8901. They were the military that was based here, which were Royal Marines. That was then kind of changed because after the conflict, they then established Mount Pleasant, or MPC is known as now, Mount Pleasant Complex. That's our international airport. And immediately after the conflict, we created a fishing industry, and we saw a new wealth to the Falkland Islands, and then everything really started to develop. Because before that, it was main source of income was through agriculture, which is also still very important, and it was the large amount of agriculture led to people having motorcycles down here.
Seems like we lost you there for a second.
Yeah, sorry about that. So yeah, things developed after the conflict, and then we moved into the 1990s and 91, and by 92, people were starting to show some interest in off-road motorcycle racing. Now, they're still on things like matchlesses and some trialsy bikes like Suzuki TS 185s and things like that. And it was in 1982. Sorry, in 1992, they organised the first enduro, and this was basically an overnight enduro. So the first day they went from the capital out to a place called the Great Britain Hotel. Now, bear in mind, back then and even now, like, the road network is pretty primitive, and back then there was no surface roads. The road left the capital, and you had maybe a few miles of road, and then it was all overland to get anywhere in the Falklands. And they set up an enduro which took riders out to this place called Great Britain Hotel, and it must have been pretty awesome event to be in. They literally slept in the back of Land Rovers that night, probably had a bit of a party, and
So
then
how far is that out there to the Great Britain Hotel from where you guys, or where the event started?
so you could like drive it now because there's a surface road, and you drive it in probably 40 minutes, something like that. But back then, they went up various mountains, and there was various checkpoints, and I think it was like a time card enduro sort of thing. I think there were some special tests in the morning, but that took them all day. I think they were out for 5 hours, so not not a long enduro. And then they stayed the night, and then the next day, this was all over sort of just before New Year. So it was in the middle of summer, and I imagine it was fairly good weather. They probably had a pretty decent party, and then all headed back into town following the same checkpoints back, as far as I understand.
Oh, nice, nice. So, yeah, okay. So I got to clear it up. We had a little bit of a stoppage there from Sean's obviously down in the Falklands, and the sheep that's turning the wheel to run his internet must have needed a feed or poo or something like that. So it is what it is. But the other thing that I've noticed is, and for any listeners that we might have out there, that I asked Sean how far something was, and he told me how long it took. So we're dealing with those island people that do everything on a day to day basis of how long it takes to do it.
Yeah. So moving forwards a little bit, into sort of the 93 sort of time, they then did establish the Falklands Motorcycle Association. They formed a group, a committee, and they organised the first few races in that sort of 93 into 94. Every season that we refer to the 93 94 season. It always overlaps the new year. So because, basically, our summer is in, Christmas time. So they had a few events, around that time, places like Estancia Farm, Wildest Ridge, Two Sisters, and these were proper grassroots, a few pegs in the ground, a whole load of guys on some bikes, and these were pretty rough old bikes. Apparently they were falling to bits in the pits at the start of the day, let alone how rough they were at the end. And these were really deep mud races. Few jumps, really, hardly any jumps, some ditches, but deep peat. We got some really boggy ground here, and in those early days with those, basically farm bikes, these were air-cooled farm bikes, not much power. These were like literally some of them would set on fire. They'd get that hot and covered in peat. The peat would dry out, set fire on the exhaust, and we had fires that we had to deal with.
Nice,
There,
nice.
there was like one guy, Arthur Turner, who was like a legend in his day, big part of motocross in the Falklands. Unfortunately, got killed in a car crash. He had a Husqvarna WR400, like a big bore two-stroke, and he was kind of dominating back then in the very first sort of year. But pretty wild. I've seen the videos. This guy's in like a leather jacket, tassels hanging off the back, cowboy boots. They had helmets, but pretty much that was it. But they took on the Falklands' finest peat mud races and raced around all day and loved it. And it really, that first few events really kickstarted things into the next season, which saw sort of the 94 into 95 season. That was the first really full organized season, really. During that time, at the end of the 1994 season, they'd proposed that they would raise some money and send their best two riders over to the Welsh Enduro. So, a bit of background with the Welsh Enduro. At the time, there was a guy called Jeff Porter down here who was experienced in riding enduros in the UK. He was a big Husqvarna guy, and he said to the guys, "You got to get over to the UK. There's an event. It's called the Welsh 2-day Enduro, and it's like the biggest event of its kind in the UK, based in Mid Wales. Around 500 to 600 riders, loads of different classes, from sidecars to the sidecar bikes, to twin shock class, to sportsman, clubman, expert, and then they got like the championship class, which is like the pro class. And so the seed was planted then, and they started putting their heads together. I was literally just looking through some facts and figures, and I managed to find the original facts, which was like between my dad and this guy Jeff Porter, where they were kind of trying to drum up the funds and work out how much it was going to cost, and the original budget to send these two guys over in 1994 was 3,480 quid. Now, back then, that's a lot of money. It was 950 quid return flight alone. So, they needed to do some fundraising. And that's actually when they actually organized one of the first rover rallies, which, is referred to as shit tracking. And they organized a rover rally all the way across the Falklands to raise money to send these two guys over to the Welsh Enduro. So they drummed up some money, and they actually ended up sending two guys and part funding a guy. And so the two riders that qualified was Derek Jaffrey and Arthur Turner, and Andrew Alazia also ended up going part funded. And they rocked up in Mid Wales. They needed somewhere to stay. They needed some bikes. Both Andrew and Arthur actually took their own bikes over. And Jeff Porter, I believe, was trying to drum it up with a family called the Zambruskis, who still run one of the most successful motorcycle parts distributors in the UK. I actually buy off them for our company. And they were trying to get them in the door with them, and they helped out with like a garage and a bit of setup. But Derek Jaffrey needed a bike, so he went to the nearest dealer, walked into a Suzuki dealer in Mid Wales known as E.T. James, and bought an RM250 or RMX 250. And that kickstarted like such an important relationship that continued through the years, which we all have benefited from. So Derek walks in there, says hello, buys a brand new bike, and they were amazing. Those guys at E.T. James, they let them use the workshop. we've been back and we've slept in their, spare rooms and used the garage, and all of it just wouldn't be possible without their help. So,
So you guys are, pretty closely tied. I mean, you're obviously English territory or British territory, but you guys are still very, very closely tied to everything that is British because obviously in the other podcast we deal a lot with Bermuda, and Bermuda is very tied to the US, and it's simply a location thing, logistics thing. But you guys are kind of skipping across a lot of countries and a lot of islands to get back to the UK. Is that true to say that you guys are very closely tied to the UK when it comes to motorsports?
yeah, like absolutely. You look at us on a map, on the global map, and we are 8,000 miles away from the UK. We're at the other end, we're at the bottom of the world. But, you know, there's so many people that have moved down here from the UK, set up, sheep farming and things like that. And we're all very proud to be British, and we're made up of, originally we were made up of a colony of, English and Irish and Scottish and a mixed match of all sort of things. But the common denominator is that we're all British. We're a British overseas territory. We're self-governed, um, but we are proud to be British. We're fiercely independent, and I don't want to go too political, but that's issues that we've had in the past. Obviously certain neighbours not respecting our right to self-determination and whatnot. But yeah, we all get back to the UK. A lot of us have got families over there. We still ship the vast majority of all of our imported goods, be it from cars to our tinned food. It all comes from the UK. You would think, being so close to South America, that you'd use South America, but the bureaucracy, of getting goods out of South America, everything gets, this tax and that tax, this levy. It's ridiculous. It works out cheaper for us to pack containers in the UK, transport them across the ocean, redirect them in Montevideo, where they join a smaller vessel, and then that ends up coming down to the Falklands. And that's, that specific setup wasn't quite the same back in 1994, but there was the military transport ship, which that did actually bring their bikes back and brought many bikes from the UK on a military ship down to the Falkland Islands.
Wow, wow, that's good to hear. So sorry, I keep interrupting your Welsh enduro stories. So carry on.
No worries. Yeah, so that was a big learning curve for the team that went away. I think they had some success over there. Andrew Alazia achieved best overall rider. There was some confusion as well there, and I'll say this now, and it's probably the first time it's ever been publicly said. There were some confusion between that, because Derek Jaffrey did place higher than him, but for some reason Andrew Alazia got best overseas rider. And if I see Andrew Alazia tomorrow, and if he's listening, I'm sorry if I'm wrong. I'm just saying what I've been told. They did go back, and they had various success in later years, including 1995. They went back, and Derek went back on his own, and he was again best overseas rider. And at the time, he achieved a third place in the four-stroke class, in the clubman class, which for a small population at the time, it was probably about 2,500 people. Some of these riders, including Derek Jaffrey, they were actually contract gatherers. They were going from farm to farm, riding DR350s and gathering every day. And Jeff planted the seed about going over, and Derek tells me, we jumped on the plane, we went over, and we started winning stuff, which is incredible. For such a small community, a small place, literally have had one season of racing, a place where you've got absolutely no trees, to go and put yourself into a forest and competing in special tests and start getting podium positions in various classes. I think is pretty amazing. But I think what makes a lot of riders in the Falklands good riders, they're pretty versatile. They have to ride on all sorts of terrain. There's an enormous amount of freedom. You can ride, 6 or 7 different terrains on one ride in an hour. You can be crossing beaches, going up mountains, going across rocks. It can be muddy, it can be slippery, and there's just so much freedom. I understand now in the UK, you might go over there and you can't ride here, you can't ride there. You have to stick to the green lanes, and it's just completely different to what it used to be. So, I think the sort of average rider here is actually fairly good technically. We're not exactly the fastest motocross riders going. We're not throwing whips over jumps, nothing like that. But I think we can handle ourselves getting across pretty rough terrain. You've seen some of the stone runs and things like that, and you probably can appreciate the sort of rugged terrain down here. And the riders back in the early 90s that were leaving the Falklands to race in the UK, they were taking those skills over and amazingly doing really good for themselves.
Yeah, so I was going to ask you about that because we've dealt with a lot of people on the island in various ways and DMs and stuff coming through our Instagram. So is it a thing in the Falklands that you're taught to ride at a fairly young age to deal with, you know, the conditions and the distances and stuff like that? Is there a lot of people that are riding on the island on a fairly daily or a weekly basis?
I think in the sort of 90s, we were looking at the time, there were a lot of kids that were growing up on farms, and growing up on a farm, these kids were thrown onto PW80s, PW50s at a young age, and they were helping out as much as they can. They were getting sheep in, moving cattle or whatever it might be. Things are, and people had bikes, but there weren't really many motocross bikes down here at the time, but people were riding bikes, and they were riding bikes. You can literally push your bike out the back of your yard across a few roads, and you're onto common land, and then you can ride, all through the mountains, and you can, on a calm evening, you'll open the door and listen out the window, and you'll hear, a four-stroke or a two-stroke getting up the valley. And it's the next generation, it's the young generation going out into the hills, just like I did, just like you know older kids did before me and generations did before me. So I think it's the freedom that if you do want to ride, you can ride every night, you can ride somewhere different every weekend if you wanted. But at the same time, for a long time, all the way through the 90s, there was a small junior class which I was involved in, and my brother was involved in, maybe 3 or 4 junior riders, and that was it. And that's the big difference now is, we've got a peewee class of at times like 15 peewee kids. We've got a junior A, a junior B class, so, we're pushing out over 20 kids onto the motocross track on a weekend, when before we'd struggle, sometimes we'd only have one, and that was it. So yeah, I think the freedom riding is there as much as you want it, and it got a lot of people out on their bikes at a young age, and putting a lot of hours in. But the competitive side for a long time was just, there just wasn't anyone to race against. Like, people weren't that keen.
Is that something that's picking up now, Sean, where you have I don't know, I'm just going to throw some numbers out there, but I see that you have about 49 riders in the club right now. Is there, another 100 out there that are doing their own thing on the weekends, or are, the majority of the people that have raceable bikes showing up to your club events?
No, definitely. There's a lot of people here with bikes. If everybody turned up for an event, you could have 3 or 4 times the numbers. Most certainly. By the end of the season, our membership will grow to between 60 and 70, and one of the reasons for that is we run what's known as the Moral Enduro, and it's just a fun event. It's pretty amazing. You ride around a mountain, you go past penguins, pretty amazing scenery, and that can attract all sorts of riders. Sometimes we even have a few people turn up on quad bikes, some older people, younger people. It might be a father and a daughter, or a father and a son come along, and they'll sign up, be part of the club, and help bring our numbers up. But they might not race the rest of the season. But like I said, there are so many people here with motorbikes. Motorbike riding is really popular, and I think you just got to put on as many different events as possible, including fun events. Have a go, riding schools. You saw fairly recently we went over to the west and had a ride over there, bunch of us. It's putting on as many events like that to try to coax people in, both young and old. It's never too late to race your first motocross, and it's never too early.
Yeah, we've got. I know, you know, one of the guys I make fun of all the time on our podcast is Troy. We call him Hobnob, but I'm sure everyone down there calls him Hobnob as well. But Hobnob Hopman, and he said that he sent me a couple of pictures of him, riding out in the field and doing some jumps and stuff, but he just doesn't get around to joining the club and going racing. But those would be the kinds of people that. I don't know how you structure something down there in the Falklands, because I obviously don't live there, but I grew up in the outback in Western Australia, or what people would consider the outback, and we had a fairly thriving club. We had the Australia's largest club, but it was all about the fun events. The fun events attracted way more people than the average motocross, and you know. It's not my place to say what anyone in the Falklands needs to do, but that would be amazing to put on some kind of ride that attracted all the bikes on the island to do it and participate and help the club out.
Yeah, definitely, definitely. We've organised fun events in the past, and I admit at the moment we can struggle just to put together a season with the helpers that we have. Um, it would be amazing to do more, um, but it's just time, and it's getting new members into the committee that's got some enthusiasm, some fresh blood that wants to grow the club and develop it. We've got some plans in place, and we're trying to move things forward, but there's kind of only so much you can do when there's a few of yous and you've all got daytime jobs. But that's the same story in every place, and I hear it on your podcast when you talk to the guys on Bermuda and stuff. It's the same people for many years that help out.
Yeah, and I mean, let's face it, that's the only way that you can keep it going. I do see that you have 7 tracks, which is amazing. I guess that comes from a low population and a fairly good amount of land out there. But you have, you know, some clay tracks, some grass tracks, and the one that I'm really stoked about is the beach race. When is the beach race coming up?
I think that's going to be in a few months. I think that's going to be a March event. Traditionally, that used to be the first event of the year, last September last Sunday of September. But it was a beautiful place, Long Island Beach, incredible, but so cold. It can be so cold in September. So Kieran, our church, her plan is that we're going to move that into the summer, to hopefully get some better weather, and have a good race there, because we have cancelled it for a few years, so it's kind of making a comeback. But it's incredible. Like, the scenery there is incredible, and I got to take my hat off to the kids here, the Pee Wee riders and the juniors. Like, they are tough little kids. They'll go out, they'll race for 10 minutes, come back in, and they're shivering. And they've been out racing. But if you say, "Do you want to race today?" They're always keen. They will always be out there. Driving rain, horizontal snow and sleet, and they are out there. I was just talking to actually Derek Jaffrey earlier, and he asked his son Travis, who Travis Jaffrey progressed through the junior class, and he's into the clubman class now, and Derek, who's representing the Falklands many times over, and a champion of the Falklands a few times. He was like my own flesh and blood. I called him up. I was like, "How's your race, son, on New Year's Eve?" And he's like, "Dad," was like, no, I didn't race. It was too cold and wet." So it's like those little kids, they'll be out there on the bikes. They're showing like the clubmen and the experts how to do it, because There's nothing that puts them off. They're like hard as nails.
Yeah, yeah. I think it's the older that we get, the more used to comfort we get. Because I walked out of the house this morning and it was a little bit chilly, and I was just like, this sucks. But back in the day, it definitely wouldn't have been a problem. But so one thing I wanted to touch on with you guys is, I think I saw someone racing a Sherco down there. That might actually even be you that's racing the Sherco. But um, if you guys come to race week, you got the whatever the big race is for the year on in the weekend, and someone needs a part on a Monday. Is that something that you can get from the UK in time? Is that paying an extraordinary amount of money to put it on a flight, or are you just kind of shit out of luck for a couple of weeks until a part shows up on the boat?
I tell you, there's a lot of beg, borrowing, and stealing that goes on. You know, the worst thing you can do is buy an exotic B2 or something like that nobody else has got in the islands. You got to pick a bike, which is common. That's my advice to anyone. And so when your bearings shit themselves or something, you need a set of rear wheel bearings. You can just borrow someone's back wheel or something and get your bike. They call it the Falklands factor because if you try to get anything from the UK, if they post it to you, which a lot of companies would just be like, sorry, we don't post to the Falkland Islands. Where the hell is that? If they do post to you, it's somewhere between 10 days to like 3 months. Literally sometimes because it's got to fly with the military. If they don't load it onto that plane, sometimes they'll just put it on the ship. And so you won't know until it gets here. It might take 3 months, it might take 10 days. So, you know, I always say make sure you get all your parts in, make sure you got your spare levers, your brake pads, everything that you might need for a season. But yeah, people help each other out, fortunately. There's some real key people in the Falklands motocross that help each other out and work on bikes and fix bikes for each other. But that's, part of small community island life. People help. You might get something fixed and, you give them a case of beer and shake their hand and take your bike away.
Yeah, yeah. I I had a I was sponsored by KTM down in Australia, and I got one of the first years. I think it might have been '98 with the hydraulic clutch, and they had the Magura hydraulic clutch on it, and I fell
Yeah.
off and broke a lever, and I was out where I grew up, out in the outback, and it was $210 for the lever, and I think my bike was parked up, let it in the shed for about 2 weeks till it showed up. So I can feel your pain, but nowhere near as much as waiting for 3 months to get something to show up down there. But which brings me to my next question. Just for shits and giggles, I've been looking at going, hey, what if I just dropped everything and flew to the Falkland Islands and hung out for a week and got around there? And I actually had Chat GPT look up a response, and Chat GPT basically told me if I get to Santiago, Chile from where I am right now, but I miss the plane to the Falklands, then I could be just sitting in Santiago for 7 days. How does that work? What's the logistics to get someone off the island to go to a race?
Yeah, that's absolutely true. There's one commercial flight that flies in a week, and it's on a Saturday. But to make that connection, you fly from Santiago on the Saturday morning, so you need to be there on the Friday, I think it is, and you fly through. But if that flight is cancelled, which it happens a lot, it really does happen a lot. The flight can be cancelled. And if it can be delayed 24 hours, but after that, there's kind of like some issues that you start to run in. Basically, the flight that flies from Punta Arenas, Chile, has got to go through Argentine airspace, and there's a bit of an agreement, but Argentina is obviously not our best friend, and we cannot fly through their airspace all the time. So that's why you'll get a delay, maybe 24 hours. But if it starts going pushing past that, Argentina will be like, no, you're not flying through our airspace. You're going to have to fly next Saturday. And in the middle of, summertime, we've got tourists coming down. We've got cruise ship exchanges. Flights are ram-packed. But the good news is that there is another option, and we can fly with the military, but that flies from here out to Ascension Island, which I understand you guys are going to be having a chat sometime soon. You land at Ascension Island, you stand around in a cage for an hour and a half, the plane gets fueled up and you carry on flying to the UK. Basically, like an 18-hour flight, can be pretty busy, and you land at a RAF base in the UK. And that is the route that we've taken in the past when we go over and we compete internationally. We fly with the RAF.
Wow. So, and again, not getting into the political thing. So, Argentina is still, pissed at you guys. I personally, I am too young. That sounds wrong, but I'm too young to understand what the conflict was about in the first place, other than them wanting to claim, the Falkland Islands. But what would they be claiming? Is it just a bunch of land, some sheep? I mean, there's no oil and gold and everything there on the island, is it?
Well, they didn't know it at the time when they invaded, but yeah, there are oil fields here. That's all very recent. There was oil exploration in 2013-14 time, but literally in the last few months, a company has pulled the trigger, made their final investment decision, and they're going to start drilling in the Falklands. So yes, there is an oil industry, or is about to be. They didn't know at the time. Very small population, and to be honest, Argentina, who at the time in 1982, they were running through all sorts of problems politically themselves. The country was fighting each other. So, what do you do to bring people together? You go and invade someone else. They probably thought that nothing would happen, that the Britons wouldn't retaliate. The soldiers were told that they would be liberating the people of the Falklands, and we were all happy to be Argentine. Obviously, that wasn't the case. Maggie Thatcher, bless her, and the British Armed Forces came down in 1982 and liberated us, and we're forever grateful for that.
Wow. Wow, yeah, that's probably too deep for a podcast about motorcycle riding and stuff like that. But it's definitely information that I didn't know and had no. I mean, maybe there's a listener out there that's well, probably 90% of the listeners are smarter than me and are interested in it. But yeah, that's definitely some information that I would never have known. So, um, so what is the club is obviously doing, let's say, as it's as healthy as we could or you could think it would be, with the hurdles that you have down there in the Falklands, lack of population and lack of people that actually want to go racing and stuff like that. But what does the next 5 years look like for the club? What does the future look like for the club? Is it going to kind of stay the same? Maybe are you always battling an uphill battle to stay alive for the next year, or is it just, if you have 10 riders, you have 10 riders and you just go racing anyway?
I think the future for FEMA is pretty bright. I think we're going to continue to organise successful seasons. I think what we need to look at now is, as a kid in the 90s racing bikes, I was looking up at the likes of Johnny Summers, Andrew Alazia, Derek Jaffrey. These guys were going over to the UK, representing the Falkland Islands and winning trophies for the Falklands in enduro. So, which was amazing. They in all, there's been 17 Welsh enduros entered by riders from the Falkland Islands. I entered in 2010, went back in 2018, 2022. I came third in my class. Regan Newman, that you guys talk about all the time, she came over and was the first female rider to represent the Falkland Islands. Unfortunately, dislocated her shoulder in the first day. Did finish the first day, but couldn't ride the second. Incredible effort. My brother Jay Moffatt, I think in 2015, he came third in his expert class, which is one of the best results ever seen. You've talked about Leslie Dixon, and his dream is to go away and do the Welsh Enduro. So, moving forward as a club, I want to see us sending riders over to the UK competing in the Welsh Enduro, or other places. Talking to you guys, talking to Bermuda. Something we could pull something together. Just recently, the Falkland Islands Development Corporation has supported the Sheeran club here. They basically put on a Tri-Nations event, got shearers from Wales and from Chile, and had local shearers, and really put on an international event, which was live streamed. It was really run really well. So I'm in talks at the moment with FIDC, and we're trying to like look at some land a little bit closer to Stanley, and maybe one day, we do some sort of Tri-Nations event here, get some riders down to the Falklands. I'm sure we could pull some bikes together. Or we get Regan over there to Bermuda. I need to go and talk to her about that. But certainly I want to see some young riders getting over to Wales and representing the Falkland Islands in the Welsh Enduro again.
Yeah, and that'd be great to see that. And the point of our podcast and the point of me and Chikai getting together was kind of just help. Started out as helping just Bermudian riders get off the island and go and do some racing, but it's kind of expanded to, I guess, other places where we talk to the people in Gozo constantly. I've got friends in Sicily that own, a lot of tracks and do a lot of stuff over there. So, we're actually in talks with some people in Germany right now about kicking off sending a rider over to their winter kickoff. So one of their big races. So, we're definitely in it for the long haul. I've been, in motocross for, wow, it sucks, but coming up on nearly 50 years. So, we'd definitely like to be a part of whatever you got going on, but at the same time, we'll support however we can and see what's going on. But what's, I see on your Facebook all the time, and again, we only get our information from Facebook, but I see on your Facebook, someone went out to the track and forgot the keys to something or whatever
Yeah.
it is, and
Yeah.
they've got to get how far is the track from Stanley where you guys get to go racing?
In terms of miles, because I can talk about more than just driving distance. In terms of miles, you're talking it's like 65 miles, 60 miles to our furthest track, which is at the moment it's kind of Goose Green, the Boca, or we did have a new track this time out at Hope Cottage. That's probably about 70 miles away. But what you got to consider is for the first 30 miles you're driving on tarmac, and that is the only 30 miles of tarmac in the Falklands. After that, you're on gravel at best, And so all of our tracks, we need to have them close to the road, because if something goes wrong, we need to carefully get someone back to Stanley. We can't necessarily rely on an ambulance coming. We provide our own medical cover with people that volunteer who are, trauma trained. But you can't rely on a helicopter. You can't rely on an ambulance. So a lot of our tracks are as close as possible, but that one, for example, you're talking 65 miles in terms of distance, but to drive, some people are pulling trailers, things like that. You're talking, an hour and 20 minutes to drive out there, which, is nothing really. People in the UK will drive 5 hours. I'm sure in Australia you'd probably drive a few days to get to an event. So everything's pretty localized, to be fair. It's really not that bad. But when you forget the keys to the groundhog, you got to be on the phone, because that is basically like our toilet block, and it's like a little office and everything. And you can't get back to Stanley, get the keys, and go back out there. So that's where the story came from, is basically trying to get someone to get those keys out to the track.
Yeah, and that's. I was just. It reminds me of being in the outback. I mean, obviously, it's a completely different place, but it. I'm obviously in the US right now, and everything is so simple here. Something happens, you go to the store. You wake up in the middle of the morning or at 2 o'clock, and you want to get something from Walmart. You rock down to Walmart and get it. But I remember one time we were at a race, or we were going to an event that was way out in the middle of nowhere, and me and my brother drove out there, and we got there, and he'd forgotten his socks. So we couldn't get back home to get socks or anything, so he wrapped his feet in some rags and put them into his boots so that he could go riding. And I just envision you guys having the same problems of, oh, you shit, you forgot something, and now it's a 2 hour trip to get back to town to get it or whatever it is. So yeah, I appreciate the distances and how hard everything is to get to.
Yeah.
So heading forward, like what are the big hurdles for you guys coming up? Obviously you've got, well, not so much distances, but time to get places because of the road situation. You're out there in the middle of nowhere. Like the weather's obviously going to be pretty tough because you are pretty close to Antarctica and all that sort of stuff. So, what are the big main hurdles that are coming up for the club? Not necessarily to survive, but to thrive.
So one thing that we've just purchased and it's heading our way is a transponder system. That's been a long time coming. We've relied on lap counters, and that's been that's caused arguments in the past. People have disputed the results, but the lap counting girls, we call them lap dancers. They're amazing. Like they put in so much time and effort, and as for somebody that's been racing for many years, like I really appreciate what they've done. But finally, we're getting a transponder system. We can use that for the enduro event. It's getting people to help. It's getting people to help maintain tracks, to marshal every event, just to create a new track. Landowners have been amazing, and there's been local companies, from fishing companies to local companies within the private sector, that have been amazing. There's been companies based at the Mount Pleasant complex, part of the military contractors, like for example Trant, and they've been amazing. They'll drop off a digger and a dumper, and they'll just say like, "Yep, fill your boots. We'll fuel it up. Don't worry about that." And that way we can build tracks. We've got a bit of money that we can maintain tracks, but it's getting the time. It's getting the helpers, the people that have got a bit of skill, can operate machinery. People like Adrian Sim. You've talked to Shanice Sim. Her husband is also a Saint Lenian. Maybe you get to talk to him one day, but you'd need subtitles because nobody can understand him. Sorry, Sim. But people like Sim, he's been amazing, like out there building tracks, as I have, and my brother has, and my dad. We've all been involved for many, many years. Everybody wants a new track. Everybody wants to see tracks developed. Everybody wants a longer straight. Everybody wants bigger jumps or shorter jumps, or everyone's got something to say. But it's get out here and build a track with us, or build your own track, and we'll come and race it. So our numbers are growing, but it's to keep things moving forward. I'd love to see us have a more professional setup, a track with a barn with some machinery that we can look after our own track, that the little kids can use every weekend, that it's kind of safe, it's gated, it's got some toilet facilities. Like, we pull around this little groundhog which is on wheels. Before that, we had literally had a pop-up tent with a fold together plastic toilet which we'd take to each event, and you would literally play rock paper scissors who's going to have to empty the bag at the end of the day. And being in a windy environment, that's never much fun. We then got this groundhog, which is like this container on wheels that literally tries to pull you off the road any chance it can get. To have a real, like, public toilet on foundations in a building, like, that's a pipe dream. Like, we want to make it happen. We've probably got the money, and we have got some land outside of Stanley, but it's getting the ball rolling, it's getting it organized, it's getting the planning permission done, it's getting the materials ordered. Like, somebody's got to do it, and we just need more help between us all. We all need to pull together. The club's pretty big, and there's a lot of parents, and a lot of kids. We all need to pull together if we're going to make this club grow further. There are possibilities in the future. We can send riders away, we can get riders here, we can have pretty good facilities, but we need to pull together to make that happen. Pulling off a season's one thing, but to grow the club, when you look at where it's come from in the 90s, we had a big gap in the middle where basically in like 99 or 2000, a guy rocked up from the insurance company that provided our public liability insurance, kind of shook his head, didn't approve. He went away, hoiked our insurance prices up, and killed the club overnight. And for the next 9 years, it lay dormant until we kind of like reestablished things, created new rules and regs, got all our safety in order, and then started putting together some really good events, some good seasons. And since then, other than some seasons where we stepped out due to COVID, we've been having some really successful seasons, and the club's been growing and growing. But it's literally that getting more people on board, getting young people on board that can help, have got some time. So some of us others can start to step back, and, I'll certainly step back in when my daughter's racing and ripping around, but, I just can't dedicate the time like I used to 10 years ago. It's just not possible now.
So what is the motocross or the motorcycle association competing with on the island? Like, is there I don't know, a basketball association or a cricket association, football or something that is taking a lot of the sports people? Like, what's the main sport down there that is, I don't want to say taking or stealing members, but is, people are drawn towards rather than the motocross side of things?
Yeah, for a small community, there's a lot going on. Um, from a young age, you're able to compete in obviously things like football, hockey's indoor hockey is actually really big here, and they take teams away and they compete in Chile, which is fantastic. There's all sorts of sports you can compete in, and there's actually a national sports council facility is at the moment building a new complex which has got a climbing wall, and it's going to have a number of indoor facilities for anything from badminton to outside. There's like a big cricket field, so there is a lot. Lawn bowls is actually gaining some traction, and it all goes back to the fact that people leave the island and they compete in the small island games, all the Commonwealth games. And I know people have been over and competed, and they've been to Bermuda and competed, but places like Jersey and Gotland and the Shetland Islands, and we've had success. We've had gold medals in shooting and archery, and for a country that's literally like 3,500 people, it's incredible. We punch above our weight, and for kids that want to get involved in sport, there's lots of options. For motocross, we're basically the last Sunday of most months in the summer, so we're only 8 rounds. So I don't think we really clash with too much. The riders that do ride, they turn up to every event. I never hear of them saying, I can't race because I've got something else on. They for that one Sunday, they seem to put the motocross first if they're keen. But it's great where you can represent the Falklands in so many different sports.
Yeah, that's I mean, that's both great and, a little bit of a hit to the club, because obviously going and playing a game of football is completely different to sourcing a motocross bike and a pair of boots and a helmet and gloves and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, and going out and doing that. But I'm going to issue a challenge to my boy Tyler Hopman and tell him to get some boys together and show up and help at a motocross event, and maybe flag, do some safety stuff, maybe sign some people up and do some racing. So, Tyler, if you're listening, grab your boys together and go out and support Sean and everyone at FEMA, and get down there, Falkland, and I don't know, do something. Come up and you can be the next guy on the podcast and tell me all about your experience there with FEMA.
Yeah, that's it. I think another one of the challenges that we had, when you look back at the sort of 2015 time, when you looked at the numbers, you're talking like 3 junior riders at best. And one of the problems that they faced for the parents was the fact that weren't really many second-hand kids' bikes here at the time. So there was people like Eddie Grimmer and Lee Clement. They had boys that were coming up through the ranks, starting at a really young age. They're in the sort of clubman class now. Those parents were having to buy brand new KTM's every time the kids needed a new bike, and they were having to bring them 8,000 miles from the UK. So that was pretty tough. But fortunately now there's a better pool of kind of secondhand bikes and, some pretty good bikes, I don't know what you rode when you were a kid, but, I was on like the likes of the little KX60 and CR80s, which were good bikes, but you see the little KTM 50s and 65s now with the little white power suspension and like they're rocket ships. They're just amazing.
Yeah, I don't think you can call it white power suspension anymore. You got to say WP, WP.
Oh, okay.
I worked for KTM up here when they did the transition from the white power to the WP. You could get written up for continually to call it white power, but that's how I remember it is
Oh,
seeing the
really?
white power suspension, yeah, on everything. But that was if you had plenty of money, you went out and got yourself some WP suspension because that was the stuff to have back in the day.
Yeah, that's it. And in the sort of in the like 95, 96, the riders that were coming back from the Wales and the Welsh, they were bringing bikes back. And the Falklands, within a few years, all of a sudden you went from all these clapped out farm bikes falling to bits to like CR500s, RM250s. My dad had a Husserberg 501. You talk about having an exotic bike in a remote place. That was an example in 94 of maybe not the best bike to buy, but I've got the thing back. I've managed to find it, track it down. I've got the thing running. Got some friends that are working on it. But yeah, then it's kind of like a different world now. All of those two strokes pretty much got shipped off to Saint Helena, and I know you'll talk to Saint Helena and Ascension Island. We've got some big links with those guys. A lot of our two strokes ended up heading out there, and when the club was re-established, all of a sudden you've gone from an era where everyone's buying a bike for $3,000 brand new RM250 1996 to in the 2010 sort of era. All of a sudden fuel injected four strokes are coming in and people are seizing bikes that are costing them like 1,500 quid, 2 grand to rebuild. So it's a common story, but I do think like the modern four stroke, as good as they are, it really hurt people like in the Falklands, where all of a sudden you're having, if you want to be competitive, you're starting to have to ride and buy some pretty expensive bikes. And especially in the last 5 years, like the prices of bikes have shot up even further.
Yeah. Yeah, and unfortunately, with the modern four-stroke, when they go boom, and they will go boom, they are expensive to rebuild, and that was kind of the point of the four-stroke. It wasn't to do anything good for the environment; it was to make more money on parts, and that's exactly what happened. So it is what it is. So um, I think we've been going for an hour here, Sean. So there's definitely going to be a part two coming up, and I know this one was pretty much off the cuff and everything. But anything you want to add before we wrap it up?
Oh, I just, I hope that I'm representing the Falklands as best as I can. I apologize to anyone listening if I've made any mistakes, with some of the facts and figures that I've come out with. But proud to represent the Falklands. I listened to your last podcast when you were saying we're going to talk to some, talking heads, I think you called it, and you were saying you're going to talk to Sebastian Tortelli and David Knight, and you're super interested to talk to the guy in the Falklands, Sean Moffatt. So I'm glad I'm associated with such legends as those guys, but I don't think I should be in the same category. But yeah, just super cool that you pay interest. Everyone's talking about the podcast down here, and I absolutely wish you all the best. And it's nice for somebody to pay some interest into like a tiny little club on a tiny little island remote in the South Atlantic. Hopefully we can work towards. I was looking through some notes and I saw that it was 30 years ago this year that we had a professional riding coach down. Now, basically, my dad put an advert in the Trials and Motocross magazine, and a guy reached out and replied back. His name was David Goddard, and we put together an application for the scholarship fund, and we paid for him to come down. At the time, it was like £3,500. No, 1,500 quid. I think we got together to bring him down. So if you want to come down and teach some kids how to race and teach some adults how to race, then I'm sure we can make that happen. We can get some funding together.
Yeah, that'd be great. The whole point of this podcast was just to talk some shit about some islands and get some stuff off our chests. And I look forward to having Shakai on the show every Monday. The next Monday's show will be live, but this Talking Head series is just going to be letting you guys, tell us what's going on. And fortunately, with the amount of time I've spent in the industry, I do know people like, David Knight and, like you said, Sebastian and stuff like that. So, but it's not about them. They just happen to be draw cards that we can use. It's more about you guys in the Falklands and what goes on in the Ascension Islands. And we've met some people in Gozo and Sicily and, Shetland Islands, all over the place that want to tell us about what they've got going on. So it's great to hear what's going on. I hope some people have been entertained for sure. So very much appreciated to have you on, Sean.
Yeah, cheers. Thanks for having me on, and sure we'll be in contact.
Yeah, for sure. There'll be a part 2 for this, for no doubt. But for anyone else that's listening, again, the best place to get us is on at island.torque on Instagram. The website is coming, and I haven't told you about this, Sean, yet, but the website is currently being built right now, and we will house a place for, your results and your photos and all that sort of stuff, and we'll link it to your Instagrams and Facebook pages and all that sort of stuff. The point is not to inundate you with BS, but to give you guys a place to have a platform, and we're not going to be able to help you grow beyond anything that you're not already going to be growing towards, but just give you a voice and give everyone else a voice, and that's all our plan is to help out. And if I can get a free trip to the Falklands out of it, then that's more than enough.
Yeah, that sounds good. I'm sure Kieran Thane and Tara, they'll be keen to reach out and have a chat with you, and they'll keep you up to date with all the current races and results and things like that.
Yeah, that would be awesome. So I guess that's gonna be our first in the Talking Head series. Is Sean Moffatt from the Falkland Islands, and that's all from me, and I guess that's all from him. Till next time. So thanks everyone for listening. There'll be one of these every week. Reach out to us on Instagram, or you can drop us an email at islandtalkpodcast@gmail.com, and we'll respond as quickly as we can. Thanks, everyone.